Good afternoon and most welcome to 876. We are going to do a short lecture just before another meeting here. I think about somewhere 5 or 7 minutes to 7 we have to quit. Another quote here from Derrida is that an opposition of metaphysical concepts, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, for instance, speech, writing, presence, absence, existence, non-existence, is never the face-to-face of two terms, but a hierarchy and an order of subordination. Therefore, deconstruction cannot limit itself or proceed immediately to neutralization. Neutralization is the same that Gachet calls nullification, but it must rather by means of a double gesture, a simultaneous double gesture, a double science, a double writing, practice an overturning of the classical opposition, and a general displacement of the system. It is on that condition alone that deconstruction will provide the means of intervening in the field of oppositions it criticizes. In order to better understand this dual methodology, that is also the deconstruction of the notion of a methodology, because it no longer believes in the possibility of an observer being absolutely exterior to the subject or the object or the text examined. It is helpful to consider an example of deconstruction at work. This you can find in the literature of Derrida. And this is what I've been studying the last 25 years. To and fro, up and down, it's been depending. But one thing that is very helpful is to understand what lies in the bottom. And this is this pre-ontological, pre-conceptual topology, as Stephen M. Rosen calls it in his book, Topologies of the Flesh. And that's his take on what is before we make concepts. And what Derrida means you cannot attack it directly is that if you criticize something, you will only be standing on the verbal conceptual point. But this is even before concepts are constructed. Let me give you an example. The exclusion that only one thing can be true, or that there is an identity, or that something is an object. All those things are things that we actually experience. And what Derrida tries to sort of softening up is the experience itself. And that cannot be reached by arguments or criticism. Criticism doesn't come down to the bottom level, so to speak. It only do things that we say about this, but what is in the bottom we cannot speak of, at least not directly. And this is the reason there has to be some image or images to make understanding become experiential as well. And this is why the mirror was absolutely necessary for me to understand what is needed to make deconstruction my own method, to master it. This is very helpful as well, because this is not only words, it's description coming from different angles, but it also shows that space itself, and that includes both time and knowledge, are not constructed in the way that we experience it. And here it becomes very difficult, of course, But this one, the Möbius strip, or what he calls the Lemminskate, is one of those things. It doesn't follow the normal rules of experience. And looking at this one and reading about the descriptions, it will soften up this very, very hard conception that experience is one-sided, can only be interpreted in one way. And you start realizing even experience can be questioned. And there is nothing completely self-evident in experience. And oddly enough, this is actually sort of a criticism. This is not my area at all. I don't like criticism. But oddly enough, this could actually criticize phenomenology, because it says put everything in parentheses, disregard it for a moment and go to the experience itself. That was the word of Edmund Husserl. Put it in epoche. This questions that, and the only way of questioning that is with an image, or even better, something that is three-dimensional, looking at it. I find an odd similarity here. That's one of those deciding points in the turn of the thinking of Wittgenstein, when, I don't remember his name, it was an Italian professor who objected to the idea that for every word there was a thing or an action in the world. And he asked Wittgenstein, what is the word for this? Or what does it represent in reality? And Wittgenstein was, of course, a bit taken aback by this, and maybe that was a helping hand in him making a quite radical turn later on with philosophical investigation, the Brown Book, the Blue Book, and all that. This is similar. This is actually showing something from the world. And according to Derrida, that's the only way any change can happen. Because the general experience, the idea that this is real and it cannot be questioned, is only questioned by another experience, another image, or even better, something that is three-dimensional and understandable. Wait a second, it's not just an image, it's the explanation of the image. They go hand in hand. And Derrida calls this a twofold structure. I would say it's a threefold structure. It's built on three legs, like a tripod. And the first leg is the image, very important, extremely important, otherwise it cannot be of reality. And I would have to say that that image has to be with depth as well. It's very important. Reality has depth. The second is the explanation, so you can follow it up with your intelligence. And the third one is using logic. This is the way of Gachet. He uses an image and logic. And by that you get first shaken a bit when you look at it. My God, how is this possible in this experience world, in the epoche? It is possible. It can be felt. You can move it around. You can do everything that you can do with a regular thing. And here you start questioning things. This is the start of deconstruction, I would say. And I'm quite sure this is how it started for Derrida. He understood somewhere intuitively that reality was not what people perceived. He never put that into writing, but that was his project. He had the idea, he had it in his body. His intuition was very clear. And reading this book, you started to understand that the idea of the subject or the observer being outside of the picture, which is very, very common. This is a sense I get when I experience. I experience myself not to be part of this reality somehow. I look at it from above, or I am this origio we often mentioned. This can clearly be questioned by something called the Klein bottle. So we now left the Lemminskate or the Möbius strip, and we went into something that is called the Klein bottle. And in this picture you can get your first glimpse on something that questions everything that you experience in your life, probably. And that's an understanding that space actually can contain 100% the subject, 100% the object, and also be part of something that combines the two without any paradox. And this idea of space was not the idea of space that the Greek had, or any of their any of the people who inherited their thinking, including me and everyone else in the Western Hemisphere. So it's a little bit, you need to get down to experience, otherwise it will in some ways just be argument, because experience speaks higher than everything else. And if you hear somebody arguing for the sky that is red or purple or green, it doesn't matter how many arguments that person has. Until you really experience it, you will not see it. It will be blocked out from vision. And I think that is something very different coming from both Derrida and Heidegger. It's this willingness to really go back to where it started. Either historically, by going back to the Greek, especially as Heidegger did, and speaking about the amnesia, or as, sorry, I'll put this on break. Or as Derrida did, trying to find the origin within the text and see that there is tendency, there is this need for a presence, for a stability, and this is also something that is a perceived reality, this that there is a now, and I think that's also part of experience, and it somehow it shows up within the writing, and it makes the writing less than what it could be. And because, how can you explain this? You could say Derrida could possibly say something to the effect that it's a simplification, or I would say, actually borrowing something we just talked about earlier, it's conformism. It's conformism, that you make everything adhere to form. And of course, if you follow the Legio or everyone else, you are being, as Gadamer said, authoritarian, follow the rule, walking in the same marching step like everyone else. Of course, a piece of literature, whatever that could be, will not in the same way be accessible, because both how you perceive it will be formed by conformism, the thing you have around you. You will not be able to enter the book with open eyes, so to speak. You will already have a predetermined way of dividing things, and when it comes to Derrida, it's usually in polarities. And you feel when you read the book that polarities are equal, and that actually makes the book fall apart. Message doesn't come so clearly, and there is a nullification or zerification or neutralization of the text, because it's like plus and minus. What you end up with is zero. And a little same with space, actually. This is an idea I had maybe 2-3 years ago. If you go 100 meters west and then you return 100 meters east, you come back to the same point. The Möbius strip doesn't follow that rule. It doesn't mean that you come back to the same space. You can actually turn up on the other side. And when it comes to the Klein bottle, every step you take is a walk in a certain direction, because it's a non-localizable shape. That means that you cannot localize a point on either surface of the Klein bottle. And that means that there is just progression. And every step of the road you're taking, wherever direction you're taking, is unique in some way. Whereas the normal space we have, you can return to the same spot, exactly the same spot in some way, and thereby nullificate everything in space, all progression, all paths, all steps. And of course, in a way that's a simplification. Nullification is simplification to some extent, but it also takes away the energy of space. There is no direction anymore, because all directions nullify each other. And I think that's also the reason why, especially, well, in the East, you always have opposites, like in Hatha Yoga, or Yin and Yang in the Tao. The opposites is what makes the movement. Very, very obvious in the Yin and Yang symbol, where the oppositions is what turns the Yin and Yang circle. Also something that is obvious when you go into topologies and you start realizing, for some reason, people working within topology always have had this sense that space is actually not repeatable in the way that we usually think. So it's, one could say the regular conformist take on space is that it is homogeneous and you can turn it whatever direction you want, and the one observing the space is actually participatory. It's participating in space as well. You know, of course, that makes for a much lively space. I don't know. I think you could probably make a comparison between space and the text. That being engaged in the text with your whole self and actually being in it, believing in it in some way, that means you can understand it, you can get closer to it. And if you put in a distance and you read things like they never meant anything to you, you read them for 100, then you put a distance between you and what's in the text. And that distance is coming from both positions, both the position of the book and me. I would say the same actually applies for space. If you just look at space in this detached way, as if there were objects around me, not being in space, it will have the same conformist effect. A lack of energy, a lack of brilliance to space, a lack of being in the movement, and also there being not much movement in space anymore. And oddly enough, this is one of the greater points of this book. I really like this. I had this flair for things that moves for a long time. And one thing I really like about Stephen Rose's book is we can today show that there is an inherent movement even in vacuum. And when we say vacuum, it's a piece of space that is completely void of any matter whatsoever, not even an atom. It's like the space between the planet Uranus and Jupiter. Let's see here. And this movement is what they call the music of the universe. I should have put in these paper dots here. There we go. They are called vortices, and that is the movement in completely empty space. And I think this is part of the logical argument. Even if these are images, they won't be convincing as images, but they will speak to your logical side, and thereby opening up a bit. This is a pedagogical tool as well. But if you understand that even the emptiest of empty space, when they're not a single atom, there is a movement, and it's an energetic movement. That might open up your intellect, and once your intellect is open, you will be more susceptible to pictures, because they could be blocked out otherwise. So this twofold, as Derrida says, or threefold movement, as I suggest here, could be a very extremely powerful didactic instrument to make you progress beyond the regular limits that the conformist space is. And I will have to add a fourth thing before I end here. Space has changed dramatically in time. So the space you're living in now, the experience of space that you have in 2022 is not the experience they had maybe 400 or 500 years ago. Their space was completely different. And that would also sort of question the idea that we are all living in the same space. It would be horribly boring as well, but I think that's an objection that speaks to your intelligence more than the intellect, and that it haven't been like this for a long time. It's rather new. It actually developed more after Newton and Descartes than ever before. Well, I think it's about time now to round up. I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.